In a previous video, we visited the 6 ministries government system of ancient China. And then, in another video, we explored the 6 palaces imperial harem system of the Tang Dynasty. But did you know there was another imperial system that used the number 6? I guess 6 was the perfect number for imperial systems. This was the 6 bureaus and 24 offices, which was the management system of the inner court, staffed and managed entirely by women. These women were not palace maids or concubines. They were professional civil servants, sometimes known as female officials or 女官. Probably the most famous example was 上官婉儿, who would become so influential that many modern stories describe her as the first and only female chancellor of Chinese history. These female officials of the 6 bureaus, sometimes working with the imperial eunuchs, were involved in the handling of imperial seals and sensitive documents, managing everything from the emperor's public image to the private needs of the imperial family. Hi everyone, I'm Amy. Today, let's look at the 6 bureaus government system of female officials and see how it all worked. The origins of the 6 bureau system goes back to the Sui dynasty and its founder, Emperor Wen. When Emperor Wen reorganized the empire into using the 6 ministries government system, he realized that the inner court needed the same level of discipline. He didn't want a chaotic household run by women favor. And so, he created the first version of the 6 bureaus to manage the sheer scale of the imperial household. This was a highly organized, professional bureaucracy that mirrored the 6 ministries government in many ways. This system was then institutionalized by the second emperor of the Sui dynasty, Emperor Yang. And then the Tang dynasty took the Sui dynasty foundation and refined it further. While the 6 ministries ran the country, the 6 bureaus of the inner court were the executive officers of the emperor's private world. They made sure that the fires stayed lit, the rituals were properly performed, and every grain of rice and bolt of silk was accounted for. They were also the management of the imperial harem, creating a unique system of checks and balances. A consort might outrank a female official socially, but these female officials controlled her life through paperwork, managing the consort's stipends and handling their formal petitions to the emperor. At the very top of each of the 6 bureaus were the bureau directors, whose ranks were of the 5th grade. And within each bureau were 4 specialized offices known as si. Each office was led by a si guan, official of the 6th grade rank, assisted by a dian of the 7th grade, and supported by a zhang of the 8th grade. Now on paper, that might sound like a middle-tier position compared to the Empress. But let's put all of that into perspective and compare these ranks against the government positions of the 6 ministries. A 5th grade rank in the outer court could be a governor or a prefect of a mid-sized prefecture, which would be an administrative region that included a major city and its surrounding counties. A 6th grade rank position in the outer court could be a senior administrator within the Department of State Affairs, or a county magistrate of a higher tier county. The exact grades of these ranks could vary depending on the exact time period. So these examples are just to provide some context for comparison. This meant that these female officials were high-ranking officials with real legal authority, holding similar legal status and social prestige as the officials who governed entire counties or prefectures. They weren't just helpers, they were actual magistrates of the emperor's inner court. However, these female officials didn't rule the inner court alone. They operated alongside a parallel bureaucracy of imperial eunuchs, the inner palace service. While the female officials of the 6 bureaus focused on the internal administration and the direct service of the emperor and his family, the eunuchs often acted as the physical bridge to the outside world by carrying messages, managing the heavy labor, and overseeing the palace's external security. A bureau director had to be as much as a diplomat as an administrator, navigating the overlapping jurisdictions between her team and the eunuchs. So, how does someone join the 6 bureaus? Well, it was certainly a path that was fundamentally different from that of an imperial consort. While a consort's entry into the palace was often a political marriage or through a process that could feel like a beauty pageant, becoming a female official was more similar to passing the imperial exams. Unlike the general draft for imperial consorts or palace maids, the candidates for the 6 bureaus were recruited specifically for their intellectual potential. However, one area that is similar to recruitment for imperial harem is the beginning. This process begins with the 良家子, daughters of good families, usually between 15 and 18 years old. This primarily meant the daughters of lower-ranking officials, scholars, or respectable local families. But again, not merchants. And just like becoming selected as an imperial consort, the selected woman had no choice in the matter. You didn't apply for this job, you were chosen instead. But in order to officially become a female official, these women first had to pass a multi-stage examination process. We don't know the exact system of selection, but it likely followed the following steps. First, local officials in the provinces acted as scouts, vetting girls for basic literacy and character. Those who passed were sent to the capital for the palace entrance exam. Here, they weren't just interviewed, they were tested on their literary composition, their ability to memorize and recite thousands of lines of ritual texts, and their compository writing. They could also face rigorous mathematics tests to prove they could handle the imperial ledgers. If a candidate's calligraphy was shaky or her grasp of Confucian law was weak, she was disqualified. These probably weren't standardized exams like the imperial exam, but practical evaluations designed to see whether a candidate could actually function inside a bureaucracy. Once selected, a young woman would enter the system at the lowest level, usually as a 女史, sometimes translated as female scribes. These women were required to be literate, capable of keeping meticulous records, and skilled in the specific arts of their assigned department. And unlike the more favored-based system of the 6 palaces of the imperial harem, the career path of the 6 bureaus was based more on merit, creating a clear and visible career ladder. A young woman from a respectable family could enter the 6th bureau as a 女史, and through years of competence and skilled performance, she could climb the ranks to become a department head or even a bureau director. However, service as a female official did not mean that she could not enter the imperial harem. If the emperor took a romantic interest in a female official, her career path could then shift from the administrative hierarchy to the harem hierarchy. Another interesting aspect of this role was financial. Unlike imperial consorts, whose wealth was tied to land grants or taxes from revenue households, female officials received a standardized stipend from the state treasury. This was often paid in grain and bolts of silk. A high-ranking bureau director could earn a salary that allowed her to live in significant luxury. This provided these women a degree of financial independence that was almost unheard of at the time. However, this career came with a strict condition. A female official could not marry while in active service. This was considered to be a matter of security, logistics, and ritual purity. The most practical reason was to prevent nepotism and leaks. For example, if a female official was married to a man in the outer court or had children outside, she could become a massive security risk. With access to imperial seals and secrets, her loyalties could not be split. This system required her to have zero external ties so that her only allegiance was to the throne. In addition, if a female official was allowed to marry, she would theoretically need to leave the palace to be with her husband, or her husband would need access to her. Allowing a non-imperial male access to a woman living in an inner court was a capital offense. To maintain the purity of the emperor's household, any woman living within these walls had to be legally and physically inaccessible to any men other than the emperor. But perhaps the most unique aspect of the path of the female official was the possibility of a formal retirement, usually in their 40s or 50s. Unlike the palace maids, who were usually left with little to nothing after their time in the imperial palace, female officials could leave as a retired government official, often retaining the prestige of a rank, just like other officials of the outer court. After their retirement, female officials often returned to their families. They left with their saved wealth, their high social status, and a lifetime of professional experience. This professionalization of the inner court created a unique class of women in the Tang Dynasty. Highly educated, legally recognized, and economically empowered. Each bureau was a world of its own that handled everything from the emperor's public image to his most private needs. So what did the 6 bureaus actually do? The first and most important was the Bureau of Palace Administrations, the Shangongju, led by the palace director Shanggong. If the palace was a corporate headquarters, this was the office of the chief of staff. Their primary duty was the general management of the inner court, but in practice, they were the gatekeepers of information. And within the Bureau of Palace Administration were 4 departments. First, the Office of Records, Siji. As their name suggests, these women were the record keepers of the palace. Every document that entered or left the inner court, every petition from a consort, and every internal order had to be stamped with their seal. Next was the Office of Edicts, the Siyan. This was an interesting team whose job was to transmit edicts. When the emperor or empress issued an oral command within the palace, they would record it and draft it into a formal document. They were the literal voice of the throne. And then there was the Office of Registers, Sibu, which kept the personnel files for every woman in the palace. From the highest consort to the lowest maid, everything was recorded, from their service time to their official stipends. Last, there was the Office of Gates, Siwei. These women held the keys to the inner palaces. They managed the opening and closing of every gate, ensuring that the inner and outer world remained strictly separated. The next bureau was the Bureau of Ceremonies, the Shangyiju, led by the Mistress of Ceremonies, Shangyi. While the Ministry of Rites of the Outer Court handled the official imperial rituals, the Bureau of Ceremonies managed the emperor's daily rituals. The 4 departments within this bureau were the Office of Archives, the Office of Music, the Office of Guests, and the Office of Ritual. The Office of Archives, Siji, were the imperial librarians. They managed the imperial collection of classics, history, philosophy, and literature. They were also responsible for the education of the palace women, ensuring that those in the bureaucracy remained literate and skilled in their duties. This department also had a special position known as the Red Historians. These women were tasked with recording the daily life of the emperor and empress, recording their words and actions in diaries with red covers. These records were important sources that could be used by later historians to write the official history of the dynasty. The Office of Music, Siyue, were ritual specialists who coordinated the palace orchestra for formal banquets and religious ceremonies. The Office of Guests, Sibing, managed the reception of noblewomen or foreign female dignitaries. The Office of Ritual, Sizan, were the masters of ritual etiquette. They oversaw the technical details of palace ceremonies. Their job was to ensure that every movement, bow, and word spoken by the palace woman followed the strict Confucian laws of propriety. The third bureau was the Bureau of Wardrobe, the Shangfuju, led by the Mistress of Wardrobe, Shangfu. This bureau managed the clothing and attire of the inner court. Within this bureau, there was the Office of Treasures, Siba, who were the guardians of the state's authority. They were the custodians of the divine seals used to sign off on official decrees and the imperial talismans used for troop movements. This was the department that safeguarded the emperor's right to rule. Then there was the office of clothing, 司衣, who were responsible for the imperial wardrobe, preparing the ritual robes, headwear, and seasonal clothing for the emperor and the imperial family. They ensured that every member of the household was dressed according to their specific rank and the requirements of the ceremonial calendar. Next, there was the office of adornments, 司事, who were the guardians of the imperial image. They managed the personal adornments, which included the imperial jewelry, hair accessories, and the specialized perfumes and ointments used by the imperial family. And last, the office of regalia, who were in charge of the ceremonial weapons, fans, and umbrellas used in imperial possessions. This department also organized the ceremonial equipment used by the honor guards of the emperor when he moved through the palace. Together, these first three bureaus focused on administration, ideology, and the empire's sacred symbols. But a palace cannot run on paper and ritual alone. While the first three bureaus focused on the administration and image of the throne, the final three were responsible for the physical survival and economic output of the imperial household. These bureaus managed the food, the medicine, the living environment, and the vast manufacturing of luxury goods that defined the wealth of the imperial palace. First among these was the Bureau of Food, the 上食局, led by the Mistress of Food, 上食. In a world where food was a popular method of assassination, this bureau was responsible for food service and the safety of the food served in the imperial palace. Every dish served was governed by the Office of Meals, the 司膳. This team oversaw the cooking and supervised every ingredient that was used. After a meal was prepared, they also had to pre-taste every dish to prove that it was free of poison before it could be served. Next was the Office of Wine, 司酿, who managed the production of wines and fermented drinks. And then there was the Office of Fuel, 司制, who handled the logistics of bringing in charcoal and firewood to heat the hundreds of rooms in the palace complex. Last, there was the Office of Medicine, the 司药. These were the female pharmacists who maintained the inventory of medical formulas, medicine, and herbs of the inner court. When a physician from the outer court prescribed medicine, this team was responsible for double-checking the dosage, recording the ingredients, and supervising the brewing to ensure safety. Moving from the kitchen to the bedroom, we have the next bureau, the Bureau of Bedchamber, 上寝局, led by the Mistress of Bedchamber, 上寝. This bureau was basically the housekeeping service of the inner court. Now, it might seem like this bureau would also manage the emperor's sex life, like the system of the Tang Dynasty, but that appears to be managed by the eunuchs. Instead, the bureau managed the practical side of things, preparing rooms, lighting, clothing, and cosmetics. Within this bureau, there was the Office of Furnishings, 司摄. They were the physical stewards of the palace interior and the operations managers of the palace's living spaces. They ensured that every room was physically prepared for the emperor's arrival, that the mats were clean, and that the curtains were hung, and if something was broken, they were the ones responsible for the logistics of getting it fixed. Next was the Office of Gardens, the 司院. This team was responsible for the planting of vegetables and fruits, and managed a special farm within the palace walls. They ensured that the emperor's table was always supplied with fresh, seasonal produce. There was also the Office of Carriages, the 司舆, the guardians of the emperor's mobility. They maintained the imperial palanquins, the carriages, and the ceremonial umbrellas and fans. And then there was the Office of Lighting, the 司灯. Their responsibility was the literal lighting of the emperor's world. They managed the lanterns and candles required to light the palace every night. The final bureau was the Bureau of Works, the 上工局, led by the Mistress of Works, 上工. This was the treasury and factory of the imperial palace. The first team within this bureau was the Office of Tailoring, the 司制. This team performed the essential mending and maintenance of the imperial wardrobe, and they also oversaw the production of the intricate silk robes and formal palace uniforms. They also produced special silks that could be given as diplomatic rewards, such as to foreign countries and allies. Then there was the Office of Accounts, the 司计. While the outer court managed the empire's budget, this team managed the budget of the imperial palace. They handled the palace allowances, including the distribution of stipends to all of the women within inner court. Next was the Office of Valuables, the 司真. While the Office of Treasures from earlier guarded the imperial seals, the Office of Valuables guarded the physical wealth. They were the custodians of the gold, jade, pearls, and other precious stones of the imperial palace. They oversaw the craftsmanship of jewelry and ensured that the imperial inventory of physical riches was properly catalogued and protected. And last was the Office of Textiles, the 司裁. This was perhaps the busiest logistical office in the bureau because they managed the bolts of silk and raw cotton that functioned as the currency of the palace. In the Tang Dynasty, silk wasn't just fabric, it was money. Every time the emperor wanted to reward a victorious general or a loyal official with bolts of silk, this team had to verify the stock, record the transaction, and coordinate the physical delivery from the palace stores to the outer court. Through these bureaus, we see that the imperial palace was run like a self-contained city that required constant oversight. In the vast imperial palace, how do you prevent theft, negligence, or scandals? This brings us to the Office of Palace Justice, the 公正司. This was a specialized disciplinary office and internal affairs department of the inner court that operated independently from the rest of the 6 bureaus. At the head of this office was the Chief Palace Justice, 公正, an official holding the 5th grade rank. Beneath her were 2 司正 of the 6th grade and 2 dianzhen of the 7th grade. Their mandate was simple but absolute: to uphold the rules of the inner court. Their power was unique because it was investigative. If a woman within the imperial palace was suspected of not performing their duties or breaking the law, this office would get involved. For smaller matters, the Chief Palace Justice had the legal authority to decide the punishment and carry it out immediately. For bigger issues, she would compile the evidence, draft a formal report, and present it to the emperor or empress for a final ruling. For the imperial harem, the empress would set the moral rules for the consorts as the legislator and the judge. But the Office of Palace Justice was the police and the prosecutor. If a consort was accused of a crime or a breach of protocol, it was up to the Office of Palace Justice to investigate it. They would gather the facts and document the incident before the empress delivered the final sentence. It was a rare situation where the professional legal authority could hold social privilege accountable. Another part of what makes this system interesting is that, at least in principle, it provided a level of legal protection that didn't always exist in later dynasties. The rules were written down, and punishment wasn't supposed to be based on the mood of a supervisor. The Office of Palace Justice also recorded every infraction and every sentence in the palace archives. This created a paper trail that held everyone accountable. If an official was caught skimming grain from the supplies, or if a gatekeeper left the door unlocked, this office was there to ensure the law was followed. Having a separate discipline office meant that the 6-bureau system was largely self-regulating. It didn't rely on the male officials from the Ministry of Justice of the outer court to come in and solve problems. Instead, these female officials were responsible for maintaining order, discipline, and the rule of law within their own world. The female official system of the 6 bureaus of the Tang Dynasty shows us that history is often more organized and professional than the palace dramas would lead us to believe. Through the Tang Dynasty, this system had showed that literacy, discipline and legal accountability were just as important inside the palace walls as they were in the outer ministries. Unfortunately, by the Ming Dynasty, this system of professional female officials had gradually declined. Over time, the duties of the female officials were pushed aside and were handed over to the palace eunuchs. The transition from the 6 bureaus to the eunuch-led system of the later dynasties marked a significant shift in how the empire viewed the roles and responsibilities of women. What do you think? If you were living in the Tang Dynasty, would you have chosen the path of a ranked consort for a chance at power or even to become empress? Or would you have preferred the path of a female official with a steady salary, a professional rank, and the potential to retire back to your family with your honor and wealth? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed today's topic, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Stay curious, stay magical.